Have you ever stopped to think about how a civilization that began among stones, seas, and myths managed to influence everything we know today? How did the feared and respected Spartan warriors come to be? What were the secrets behind Athenian democracy? How did Alexander the Great so rapidly expand the boundaries of the Greek world? And why did such a powerful civilization eventually fall into decline and now face deep crises? The history of Greece is filled with surprises, glories, and turbulence that still echo to this day. Welcome to Ages and Thrones, a channel created especially for those who love history and want to understand how great civilizations of the past emerged, grew, flourished, and sometimes disappeared. And listen, the continuity of this project depends a lot on your support. So don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, leave a comment about what you thought of the video, and suggest which civilizations you would like to learn more about in the next episodes. Without further delay, let's travel through time and dive into the fascinating history of ancient Greece. Chapter 1. Between Seas and Myths, the Dawn of a Civilization. Imagine a land sculpted by Poseidon himself. Thousands of islands scattered across the vibrant blue of the Mediterranean, towering mountains that reach the skies, and valleys hiding secrets yet to be uncovered. This enchanted setting, between seas, stones, and legends, is where our journey through ancient Greece begins. But wait! Don't think that these early Greeks arrived already building grand temples or writing immortal epics. No, their story begins in a much simpler way. Between the 12th and 10th centuries before Christ, while much of the world was still slowly emerging from the darkness, the first inhabitants of the region were taking cautious but determined steps toward their future. These early peoples, such as the Minoans and Mycenaeans, lived surrounded by mystery. In the ruins of Crete, magnificent palaces with intricately decorated walls tell silent stories of powerful kings and enigmatic queens. Meanwhile, in Mycenae, massive stone walls, so impressive they seem to be built by giants, protected vast treasures and fueled legends of heroic battles and great conquests. It was said that these first Greeks lived under the watchful gaze of the gods, in a world where mortals and deities seemed to share the same fate. Every storm, high tide, or earthquake had a fantastic explanation, worthy of the most extraordinary myths. And so, little by little, legends were born that would survive the centuries. Zeus ruling from Mount Olympus, Poseidon commanding the depths of the sea, Athena radiating wisdom, and of course, heroes like Hercules, Perseus, and Achilles, living symbols of this era of imagination. But not everything was myth. While gods and fantastic creatures dominated popular imagination, behind the scenes of history, something great was taking shape. Small, isolated groups began forming cities, mastering new techniques, and, most importantly, slowly defining what it meant to be Greek. The first steps of a civilization destined to change the world had been taken, and amidst this land of contrasts and mysteries, a mighty force was about to rise. But how did these scattered and fragmented people become a power capable of challenging entire empires? Which leaders were able to unite such diversity under a single name? These questions take us directly to the next chapter of this fascinating adventure. Chapter 2. The Rise of the Polis, the Power of Unity. It was like a colorful mosaic, with hundreds of loose pieces waiting for someone to bring them together into a single image. And in ancient Greece, these pieces were small cities, isolated from one another by deep seas and towering mountains. Each of these cities seemed to exist in its own little universe, with its own laws, customs, and even favorite gods. But something unexpected happened. Like tiny stars slowly forming a constellation, these cities realized that alone they were fragile, but together they could stand against even the greatest threats. And so, the famous Greek polis were born, independent, proud, and vibrant city-states like Athens, Sparta, Corinth, and Thebes. Each had its own distinct identity. Athens was sophisticated, shining with knowledge and philosophy, almost like a beacon in the darkness. Sparta, on the other hand, breathed military discipline and legendary courage. While Athens thrived with theaters and lively political discussions, Sparta trained tireless warriors whose bravery echoed across the Mediterranean. This is when unforgettable leaders step onto the stage. Men like Solon, the Athenian legislator, who planted the first seeds of democracy, giving a voice to the people and forever changing the concept of power. In Sparta, Lycurgus, an almost mythical figure in his austerity, shaped the city with laws so rigid that they turned Spartans into nearly invincible warriors. And of course, ambitious tyrants, charismatic leaders, and rulers emerged. Men who would shape not only their own cities but the entire fate of Greece. These historical figures were like artists, slowly sculpting a masterpiece called ancient Greece. But even as unity formed within each polis, a tension began to rise, a silent rivalry, almost inevitable, between these proud city-states. What happens when such different, yet equally proud people realize they need to unite against external threats, but refuse to give up their own identity? It is precisely in this fragile balance between unity and rivalry that something much greater was about to emerge on the Greek horizon. Something that would define the future, push limits, and permanently transform history. Chapter 3: Wars and Glories. Heroes and Epic Battles. It's intriguing to realize that humanity's most significant moments often occur when existence hangs by a thread. For Greece, this was no exception. Picture this. The city-states, despite their differences, were compelled to unite against formidable foes from distant lands, bringing massive armies and an insatiable thirst for power. In 490 BCE, an exhausted messenger arrived at the gates of Athens bearing news that would forever alter the course of history. The vast Persian army had landed on the plains of Marathon. It was an entire empire against small Greek cities that, at first glance, seemed to stand no chance. Yet, in this desperate moment, unforgettable names emerged. Miltiades, the brilliant Athenian general, transformed a few soldiers into fearless giants, defeating an enemy far superior in number. A decade later, another monumental test awaited at Thermopylae. There stood the legendary Spartan king Leonidas with his 300 warriors, facing thousands of Persian soldiers in a narrow pass. A battle so heroic that it resonates through the ages as the ultimate example of courage and sacrifice. The fires of these battles illuminated Greek bravery and fueled something even deeper, a sense of identity and pride. After all, who were these men capable of resisting against all odds? What made them so unique, so special, so worthy of the greatest stories ever told? During this period, Athens and Sparta became symbols of something greater. Together, yet always rivals, they faced and defeated the seemingly invincible Persian Empire. However, it was precisely in victory that the seeds of the next conflict began to sprout. Ironically, the more the cities triumphed together, the more their rivalry intensified. This tension was on the verge of erupting in an unprecedented manner, plunging the Greeks into a whirlwind of conquests, defeats, and political intrigues that would make even the gods of Olympus tremble. Chapter 4: The Golden Age. Athens and the Light of Wisdom. After jointly facing the relentless Persian army, the Greeks had tasted the sweet nectar of victory but also sensed something peculiar. The more they won, the more divided they became. It was in this curious scenario, amidst military glories and subtle rivalries, that one city shone brighter than any other in ancient Greece. That city was Athens. Athens was no ordinary city. Imagine a place where ideas flowed as freely as the sea breeze, where people openly discussed politics, art, philosophy, and even the meaning of life. A place where Socrates roamed the streets, posing questions that shook everyone's certainties, and Plato, his brilliant disciple, articulated the essence of human thought. During this period, known as the Golden Age, Athens flourished. Pericles, an intelligent and visionary leader, heavily invested in the arts, democracy, and grand constructions that still leave us in awe today. He commissioned the construction of the imposing Parthenon, a temple erected in honor of the goddess Athena, standing as an eternal symbol of the beauty and intellect that dominated that era. While great thinkers shaped the future, artists brought to life immortal works. Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides elevated theater to unprecedented heights. Their plays delved deep into human dilemmas, tragedies, and dramas that continue to move audiences to this day. However, as with any bright light, equally strong shadows are cast. Athens' success aroused envy among its neighbors, especially Sparta. While Athens built theaters and engaged in philosophical debates, Sparta honed its spears and trained relentless warriors. Amid this growing contrast between beauty and power, intellect and brute strength, an inevitable conflict was brewing. The subtle rivalry that once was a distant breeze began to gain strength, transforming into an impending storm. But how could two of Greece's greatest powers go to war after having fought side by side? What would be the consequences of this dispute that threatened to shake all they had achieved? Chapter 5: Sparta versus Athens. The Clash of Titans. Have you ever witnessed what happens when two opposing forces, each steadfast in their absolute truth, decide to measure their strength? This is precisely how the Peloponnesian War began, one of the most devastating internal conflicts of the ancient world. On one side stood Athens, radiant like the sun, embodying philosophy, democracy, and art. On the other, Sparta, as cold as steel, with citizens trained from birth to be relentless on the battlefield. If you're interested in delving deeper into Sparta's fascinating culture, we already have a comprehensive video on this powerful city-state available on our channel. Just click the link in the description or the pinned comment. The conflict between these two cities began subtly, almost like a breeze before a storm, until it erupted into a war that lasted nearly 30 years. Almost 3 decades of epic battles, surprising betrayals, and strategies complex enough to challenge even the greatest generals. In this intricate scenario, extraordinary figures emerged, such as Alcibiades, the brilliant yet unpredictable Athenian general. A man as intelligent as he was ambitious, capable of turning the tide in an instant. Meanwhile, the Spartans showcased their unwavering strength and determination, winning battles that seemed impossible. However, this war yielded no clear victories. Instead, it left both Athens and Sparta exhausted, vulnerable, and deeply scarred. After all, this war spanned 27 years, from 431 to 404 BCE. As these two cities wore themselves down in conflict, a new power quietly rose in the north, observing everything and waiting for the right moment to forever alter Greece's destiny. Chapter 6. Alexander the Great, the man who dreamed the world. They say there are moments in history when a single man can shape the destiny of thousands, changing the course of the world solely through the power of his dreams. Alexander the Great was precisely that kind of man. While Athens and Sparta slowly destroyed each other in endless conflicts, in the north, in the region of Macedonia, something unexpected was happening. Philip II, a shrewd Macedonian king and brilliant strategist, was quietly strengthening his kingdom, paving the way for his young son, Alexander, a boy who from an early age demonstrated ambition greater than the mountains that surrounded him. Educated by none other than Aristotle, Alexander grew up hearing stories about legendary heroes, dreaming of surpassing them. At 20, after the sudden death of his father, he ascended the Macedonian throne with a clear yet audacious objective: to conquer the known world. Armed with almost insane courage and a military genius that surprised even the most experienced veterans, Alexander marched over Greece, quickly taking control of the region. It didn't take long for his gaze to turn even further, to the powerful Persian Empire, which had long challenged the Greeks. And so began an epic, almost unbelievable journey. Alexander, at the head of his army, conquered cities, crossed scorching deserts, and faced enemies much larger in number. Legend has it that he never lost a single battle. From city to city, empire to empire, Alexander expanded his frontiers, bringing with him not only wars but also culture, art, and Greek philosophy to every new territory conquered. But did this ambition have no limits? How far did Alexander intend to go? What consequences would arise from this gigantic expansion led by a single man? Chapter 7. The Fall of Giants, the Price of Ambition. Every great story has its turning point, that moment when the impossible happens, and the hero, who seemed invincible, finally faces his own fragility. Alexander the Great, who had conquered half the world, also had his moment. After conquering the Persian Empire, crossing merciless deserts, and expanding the horizon of Greek civilization to lands his ancestors could never have imagined, Alexander reached India. There, for the first time, his soldiers felt something they had never felt before: fear, exhaustion, and homesickness. At that point in the journey, Alexander's boundless ambition began to meet the first signs of resistance, not from an external enemy, but from the silent voices emerging within his own army. Many began to question whether that young king, who seemed to be protected by the gods, had gone too far. After all, what was the price of such power? And then the unexpected happened. At 32, in the prime of his youth, Alexander died mysteriously in Babylon. Some say it was fever. Others believe in poisoning. Either way, the man who had almost dominated the known world disappeared, leaving behind a vast but unstable empire, ready to crumble. Alexander's dream had been too grand to be sustained by his successors. Soon, generals and former allies, who had once marched united by his side, began a fierce battle for power, dividing the gigantic empire into smaller kingdoms. That once powerful and ambitious Greek civilization, previously unified by a common dream, slowly began to unravel, fragmented by internal conflicts and political intrigues. How could Alexander's legacy survive amid so much division? But this confusing and fragmented scenario brought to light something unexpected. A cultural legacy that would traverse the centuries and influence peoples Alexander had never even met. Chapter 8. The Hellenistic Legacy. When Greece conquered the world. When Alexander died, it seemed that his grand dream had died with him. But there's something curious about dreams. When they're too big, they hardly ever disappear completely. And Alexander's dream, although divided and fragmented, transformed into a fascinating heritage, the Hellenistic legacy. Now imagine a Greece far beyond its original borders, spread across distant lands like Egypt, Persia, and even parts of India. In these new territories, magnificent cities flourished as living symbols of Greek culture. The most famous of them was Alexandria, founded by Alexander himself in Egypt. A city that soon became the cultural and intellectual center of the ancient world. And what a fascinating city Alexandria was! Imagine gigantic libraries, where thousands of manuscripts were carefully stored. Imagine mathematicians like Euclid, writing works that are still studied today. Imagine Archimedes making discoveries so impressive that they still seem like science fiction. This new expanded Greece not only conquered lands but also hearts and minds, enchanting distant peoples with its arts, sciences, and philosophies. But there was an irony in all this. As Greek culture spread, something began to be lost along the way. A certain essence, perhaps, of Greece's original identity. The Hellenistic world was brilliant and vast, but also complex and deeply divided. Greek kings ruled distant lands but became increasingly distant from what it meant to be Greek. Gradually, the unity that Alexander had tried to create seemed increasingly distant. Rulers disputed territories, philosophers fiercely debated among themselves, and the brilliance of that civilization slowly began to fade. It was as if Greece had conquered the entire world but had forgotten who it was. And while this fascinating Hellenistic civilization tried to understand its own destiny, a new shadow slowly emerged in the West, an unrelenting power that looked with ambition at the Greek world, silently preparing to conquer the conqueror. But what power could threaten something as grand as Alexander's legacy? Chapter 9. Under Rome's shadow, the Greek twilight. No great civilization vanishes overnight. Typically, it fades gradually, almost imperceptibly. This was precisely the case with Greece, now radiant yet fragile, fragmented and worn down by internal conflicts and ambitious rulers who failed to notice a silent threat looming on the horizon. This threat emanated from Rome, a burgeoning republic to the west, rapidly expanding, fueled by an insatiable ambition. The Romans, admirers of Greek culture, were also pragmatic. They sought not only to learn from the Greeks but to govern them. The initial encounter was subtle, almost diplomatic, but it gradually became evident that Rome desired more than friendship. They sought control. As Roman legions marched through Greece, those once proud cities that had defied the mighty Persian Empire and produced geniuses like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, now surrendered without resistance, weakened by centuries of internal strife. Curiously, even in conquest, the Greeks, in a way, conquered Rome. Greek culture became an obsession for the Romans. Their art, philosophy, and religion were absorbed by this new power that now dominated the Mediterranean. It was a bitter irony. The Greeks had lost their political freedom, yet culturally remained the masters of the known world. However, this relationship was complex. As Rome grew ever more powerful, Greece became merely a provincial territory. The brilliance of ancient Greek cities was now just a distant reflection of their glorious past. Athens, Sparta, Corinth, all these great polis became mere shadows of their former selves. But does the end of political autonomy also signify the complete end of Greek civilization? Or perhaps the Greek legacy found a surprising way to endure? Chapter 10. Echoes of the Ancients, Greece in the Modern World. Time passed. Centuries turned into millennia. The empire that dominated Greece fell, and others rose in its place. Yet, almost magically, the Greeks never truly disappeared. After all, look around. Ancient Greece may have been conquered by Rome, but its ideas were never defeated. They are present in our way of thinking, in laws, art, and science. The democracy that many countries adopt today? Yes, it was born in Athens. The philosophy that shaped the West? It was penned by Greeks who debated under marble columns. Even today, if you walk through the streets of modern Greece, you'll see that the spirit of the ancients still lingers. The Acropolis of Athens, though weathered by time, still stands as a silent reminder of an era never forgotten. Traditions, customs, and even ruins tell stories to those who know how to listen. However, the truth is that, despite its immense legacy, today's Greece does not live in a period of glory. The economy, once supported by great philosophers and merchants of the past, faces difficulties. The country that once challenged empires now struggles against internal crises, trying to find a balance between its history and its future. Here arises an intriguing question. Will modern Greece manage to rise again and write a new glorious chapter in its history? Or will its role be merely that of an open-air museum, recounting the glories of a distant past? If history teaches us anything, it's that destiny is never set in stone. Greece has fallen and risen multiple times over the centuries. Perhaps now, it is merely preparing for a new renaissance. But, to know how this story ends, we will have to await the next chapters of reality. Chapter 11. The Crisis of Modern Greece, the Weight of a Glorious Past. Imagine bearing the weight of a civilization that shaped the world. Walking through streets where Socrates posed questions that challenged kings, where Plato envisioned ideal societies, and where Pericles elevated Athens to its zenith. Imagine living surrounded by columns that once supported sacred temples, while the present struggles to sustain itself. This is the dilemma of modern Greece, a land with a glorious past but an uncertain present. The economic collapse and the current crisis. For centuries, Greece survived empires, wars, and shifts in power. But in recent times, its greatest battle hasn't been against armies, but against numbers. The economic crisis that erupted in the early 21st century left deep scars, peaking in 2010. Massive debts, severe austerity, and a populace that had to relearn survival in a country on the brink of collapse. Unemployment reached alarming levels. Thousands of Greeks saw their lives turned upside down, and many young people simply left, seeking a more promising future in other European countries. The nation that taught the world to think now struggles to find its own path. Tourism, driven by ancient ruins, remains one of the main economic engines, but it's not enough to support an entire population. Domestic production faces challenges, infrastructure suffers from decades of neglect, and political hurdles make recovery even more difficult. Resilience and hope. Does the Greek spirit still live? Yet there's something the Greeks have always possessed and never lost: resilience. The same strength that led Leonidas and his 300 warriors to face an endless army at Thermopylae. The same boldness that made Athens defy empires and create a model of governance that would influence the world. Even in the face of crisis, many Greeks haven't given up. Small businesses strive to reinvent themselves, new generations seek innovative solutions, and there's a continuous effort to revitalize the economy. Cultural projects, encouragement of entrepreneurship, and attempts to modernize the country show that, although the path is difficult, the fight isn't over. And here arises the inevitable question: will modern Greece manage to rise again and write a new chapter of glory? Or will its greatness remain a distant echo, remembered in books and ruins? If history teaches us anything, it's that destiny is never set in stone. Greece has fallen and risen multiple times over the centuries. And perhaps now, it's merely preparing for a new renaissance. But to know how this story ends, we'll have to await the next chapters of reality. And so, we conclude this journey through the history of Greek civilization. From its beginnings amidst myths and seas, through the height of its culture and conquests, to the challenges of the present. A grand story, full of twists and immortal characters. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more content like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. This helps us continue bringing fascinating stories to you. Leave your like, share this video with someone who loves history, and comment below what you thought. Your opinion is very important for this project to keep growing. And of course, tell me, which other civilization or historical period would you like to see here? Let's explore the past together and understand how it shaped the world we live in today. See you in the next video.